Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining. We had a great list of attendees today, so thank you all for your time. My name's Tom. I'm with Green Tech Renewables. We have with us Brian and Chris from REC, who'll jump in here shortly to give you a great update on REC's leading products. Here's our agenda today. To help interact with your webinar tool here at the top, you will have data sheets and additional resources. You can click handouts at the very top if you're interested. Brian and Chris will be fielding questions. So please feel free to enter your questions here whenever it strikes you, and we'll get to those towards the end. And a recording will be sent to you following the event. To tell you quickly about Green Tech Renewables, we have over 100 locations around the United States supporting residential and commercial solar contractors. Our motto is to go beyond supply, which we do by providing leading finance, design, and engineering services alongside our leading equipment fulfillment services. Our core values of service, integrity, and reliability inform all of our support for our customers. And we would invite you to please reach out to one of our 100 local profit center locations near you. You can visit our website in the top right, click to contact the location, and we'll be excited to get to know you. I also want to make a plug for our design services. We offer permit plan set services across the United States. We can stamp for electrical and structural in any jurisdiction. We have experience in carports, batteries. We challenge you to bring a project that we cannot comprehensively engineer. This is accessible through your local Green Tech location, again, servicing all 50 states, and we look forward to the opportunity to support your projects. All right, Brian and Chris, with that, thank you very much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you.
I will take you on the challenge to find a project that you cannot 100% engineer and design, and I believe you guys will meet me there. Hey guys, great to be on the call with you all. We didn't put an introduction slide together, so we're just going to do it before we jump in here. My name is Brian Giglia. I'm Vice President of Sales for REC Group. I head up our residential business. Been with REC Group for 5.5 years. Prior to that, spent about 12 years in the residential segment, and super excited to spend some time with you guys today. And with me, we have the esteemed Chris Macy's, who's been in solar longer than most. Chris, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Thanks, Brian. As Brian says, name is Chris Macy's. My personal solar story goes back to February 2006. Similar to Brian, I spent about 4 to 5 years in the residential segment, predominantly of the industry, always in sales management, biz dev. Had the tremendous opportunity to start working with REC Group upon market inception around 2010, and have been here ever since.
Yeah, we're super lucky to have Chris on the call with us. He was one of the first employees for REC Americas and with REC in general. And so we'll talk a little bit about our corporate history and then get into what's new with REC Group. So let me see if I can manage to present my screen. I'm going to share that. And now I'm going to press this and present. How are we doing? Okay, get my pointer ready. Laser pointer here. We are ready to rock and roll. Okay. What you see here is a look at our Singapore facility. We've got a lot of exciting updates that we'll walk you through, and we're going to start with talking about some of our corporate history as solar's most trusted. We'll get into our product roadmap, talk a little bit about some of our reliability and historical warranty performance. And then we'll talk about the REC Alpha Advantage and how REC Group can help across every step of the value chain and specifically the installer experience. And then finally, we'll close out with some sustainability and trade policy, high impact, super important stuff that we want to make sure everybody's aware of. And then we'll open it up for some Q&A. As Tom said, we'll take questions in the panel, and we'll try and hit those at the end. Chris and I are going to ping pong here. And so if it's germane to the section when we take a break, we'll jump into it. All right. Solar's most trusted. Chris, I will give it to you.
Thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone. And case in point, as Brian alludes to, so RJ's question is a fantastic one. That's a natural fit in the product section. So we will address that as we run through there. Thank you for that. Please, everyone, keep the questions coming. Stream of consciousness as it enters your brain. Go ahead and put it in the chat. We'll make sure to weave it in. Anything that doesn't get addressed through the presentation, we will handle at the end, but we'll make sure that all the concerns, questions, et cetera, comments get addressed during this presentation. This section that's called Solar's Most Trusted, this is our tagline. This is something the company's earned over a quarter century of operation. This is really a corporate overview and background, which is very, very interesting because REC's DNA is not like the others. I like to say that we're an apple amongst oranges if you like apples, but we're an orange amongst apples if you like oranges better. Really one of those stories where the further back you peel the layers of the onion, the better the corporate story sounds. It's really fantastic. It's not the same as others that have really grown to prominence from certain areas of the world, such as China in the last decade or so. But really REC's story is that we've never tried to be the biggest. We've always tried to be the best at what we do, dating all the way back to establishment in 1996, where I like to refer to REC through our history as a solar materials manufacturer, not just a solar module manufacturer. Yes, we do make that class of product, but over the company's sizable history, we've had experience up and down the entire value chain, starting as a wafer manufacturer in Norway, literally hand washing those wafers. That was at a time where the dominant companies in solar cell manufacturing were all in Europe and Japan. If any of you worked with a Sharp or a Mitsubishi product back in that era, meaning in the 90s, early 2000s, there's a good chance that it had a REC wafer contained within it. But again, looking at the scale of today, which is a little bit under 2,000 employees, manufacturing based out of Singapore, current capacity running between the 1.5 to 2 gigawatt range. Clearly, we are not a 20, 50 gigawatt monster, nor are we trying to be. What we're trying to do is really uphold this brand promise that's on my shirt here of Solar's Most Trusted, which is how can an end customer trust that the solar panel that is on their rooftop or out on their ground mount is truly producing the energy it's supposed to for the long term in that aggressive climatic environments that these things are installed upon. And this is where really the expertise of REC as a high quality manufacturing company, the number one metric for this company since I've been around, which again goes back to 2010, has not been our market share. It hasn't been net profitability. It's really been a focus on warranty claims rate. So our corporate goal is sub 100 parts per million. In real life, we tend to hit between 50 and 70 parts per million, even across new product introductions, which we'll cover a bit later in the presentation. But this is really the expertise of REC, is in excellence in quality management systems and really producing a high quality, trustworthy product. Brian, if we could transition to the next slide, that'd be fantastic.
Gotcha.
You'll notice that my style here, and we'll sort of blend the next two together, is I'm not going to regurgitate all the words on the screen. I know some of you are likely multitasking, but it's pretty boring just to watch someone say the words that are on your screen that you could read yourself. This is what it looks like to be a vertically integrated manufacturer with experience all the way up the value chain to solar grade polysilicon through wafers, cells, and down to the module itself. So whether we are producing the entire value chain for a particular product or such as the case with today's HJT products, purely focusing on just the cells and the modules, our expertise in the firsthand production of that product class certainly helps quite a bit in our supply chain management in delivering that high quality, high performing, high reliability end product. The next slide will show a bit about our corporate history, which again, lots of individual line items because we've been doing this for over 25 years, but I like to really segment this into really three versions of REC. So we're on version 3.0 today. Version 1.0 was the early growth years. So in the 90s and early 2000s, there was no significant global market. That really didn't start until the early 2000s under the German feed-in tariff program. And this is where a lot of the early manufacturing learning and early technology learning of commercializing solar, because solar PV, the technology goes all the way back to the 1960s, but really deploying this in scale, making sure it's reliable at a reasonable cost point for all these applications globally that are grid tied, that didn't start until the 2000s. So REC was a very early mover there. Version 2.0 of REC would have been the globalization to Singapore. As a European player that was producing in Norway and Singapore, there was an understanding that as the market grew and we faced increasing low-cost competition from Asia, that really a different country of origin was needed. The country of Singapore was selected mainly because REC's method of manufacturing heavily relies on a high level of automation. So we don't need a lot of people in our factory, but we need these very talented engineers to run that. So is Singapore the lowest labor cost place in the world? Absolutely not. Is it the place that you can site a factory to produce the absolute lowest cost rectangle? Absolutely not. But if you run the plant in the right way with the right equipment, is it a place where you can derive great value from manufacturing and have an excellent value-added product? It is. So what is the change going forward into version 3.0 is really, we've crystallized on the technology platform that will give current performance benefits and the ability to scale that up, which is heterojunction on an N-type wafer. And we've been developing that manufacturing learning since 2019. And under our new parent company, Reliance, which we'll dive into in a slide or two, we now have the sizable balance sheet and the bankroll to take what we have learned in Singapore. This is best-in-class, world-renowned manufacturing prowess for the solar materials value chain. And we are translating that into a 20 gigawatt scale with a low cost structure, equal quality, equal performance, fully traceable, going all the way back ultimately to metallurgical grade silicon, all the way to the module on a single 5,000 acre site in India. This is the future of REC and our new company, Reliance. Brian, I think we have a little bit about Reliance in the upcoming slide or two. There's going to be a few animations near the top that fill in some of the key metrics, and we won't go into every single word here. Please, if you have any interest in Reliance and who these guys are, they may be the largest, most successful company you've never heard of, because I personally hadn't until they acquired us or went through that acquisition process in 2021. But they are the largest conglomerate in India. This is a company that's been around for 70 plus years with mainline older mature businesses in oil to gas and textiles and retail and telecom, but also a burgeoning new energies business where they have ambitions really in three segments, which are solar PV, energy storage, and green hydrogen. The acquisition of REC, of course, is the linchpin of the solar PV component of that. And now we have the luxury of having a $120 billion annual revenue company sitting behind us to back warranties, to really catalyze our growth and our competitiveness into the future. This is the corporate parent that we have been searching for years, because the solar materials manufacturing game is a tough one. This is covered by analysts right and left, where margins can be all over the place. In a period of shortage, they can go up, but most often they're going down. It's a very thin margin, high volume manufacturing business. It takes a very special DNA to have the wherewithal to stick with this and to implement advancements and scale up a business in the long term. And that's what we found with Reliance. Brian, if we could transition to the next slide. I believe this is the last slide of the section. This is the same Singapore factory that's actually on the background and back of me, and that we saw in the cover slide for the presentation, but I will leave you with a fascinating story. So my first visit to this facility was in 2010. The factory was built through the course of 2009, commissioned early 2010. And in those early days, this is a place called Tuas on the far west shore of Singapore. So if you've ever flown into Singapore, that's Changi Airport, that's on the far east side. This would be the opposite side of the country, but it is a small country, so it doesn't take terribly long to get there. This is the industrial part of Singapore. The infrastructure and the workforce is very well set up for high volume, high quality manufacturing. But when we first built our factory, which is front and center there, literally right across the road was the water. There's this old adage in real estate that real estate is the best investment you can make because they're not making any more. Well, there's very few places in the world where that's not true, and this is one of them. They're actually dredging sand off the shore of Malaysia to the north and adding to the landmass of Singapore. So this entire row of factories on the opposite side, and this process continues today. Ultimately, we may be miles from the shore, but they've built an entire row of factories there, and it's just really amazing to see the industrial wherewithal, really when the Singaporeans put their mind to doing something, they do it very well, and they achieve things that simply can't be done elsewhere. That's something that we're proud to consider as part of our heritage. Brian, I think we've got the next section coming up here.
Yep, absolutely. Thanks, Chris. I'll take over, but I do just want to echo how excited we are about version 3.0, right? Which is really expansion and growth with Reliance's backing, having full traceability and fully vertically integrated manufacturing process coming online. We won't have that product until probably the second half of next year. I'll talk a little bit about that, but certainly exciting times ahead. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about our product itself, let's start with the intrinsic component, which is the cell, and what drives the most intrinsic value, I should say, is the cell. I'm not going to go into all of the detail here, but I did want to at least baseline this group on what Chris alluded to, which is the technology platform that we have commercialized and decided to standardize on, which is HJT. Why did we do that? Right? HJT is, and we'll get into the structure here in just a minute, is the best jumping off point for the next technology. REC Group is a technological leader. In the 2010s, we were the best polycrystalline manufacturer. When the N-type products began to come online in the late 2015, 2016s, we actually leapfrogged and went into HJT and started manufacturing that at scale in 2018, 2019. And the reason we did that is because A, it drove more efficiency today, but B, it gave us the best platform to research and develop the next generation. And the next generation is going to be an IBC HJT module. So that's kind of combining two different technologies, interdigitated back contact and heterojunction. And we're also playing with tandem solutions, which include perovskite cells. These are still some time away, probably 18 months or 18 months to 3 years away. But the headline is that we're a technology leader, and heterojunction is the platform that allows us to innovate the most around that. The second headline is, a lot of the new products that you're seeing come online today don't have nearly as much of a runway because it's more difficult to add in new layers or new technologies onto them. Let's talk a little bit about HJT technology. Not going to spend too much time here, but it's good for us to refresh our understanding of really what is the science and the architecture behind the advantages that REC is going to offer. So heterojunction technology, the best way to think of it, at least the way I think of it, is that it's a sandwich of solar technology, right? It begins with an N-type mono wafer. For those of you that are newer to the industry, N-type is a more efficient technology for cells. It doesn't have what's called light-induced boron oxidation, so you get more year one production, and then that degrades more slowly over time. So generally speaking, it's a more advanced bulk layer for us to create our cell on. From there, we layer amorphous silicon on the top and bottom. This is a thin film technology that has broader access to broader spectrums of light. It also creates more structure for the cell itself. As you probably all know, cells are very fragile, and in transportation, you can get micro cracks. By layering on amorphous silicon and then a third layer, which I'll talk about, we create more rigidity within the cell itself, which prevents micro cracks, which results in higher overall production over the life of the system. The third layer is a transparent conductive oxide. It's TCO. Think of it like a polymer that gets set on top and is actually melted onto the cell. Within that TCO layer are the actual conductors. So most people think of bus bars. We have hair-thin wires that are more efficient at transporting electrons, and they're embedded within this TCO layer. That does a couple of things for us. We don't have to use nearly as much energy to manufacture these cells because we can adhere the TCO layer at lower temperatures, and then we don't have as much thermal stresses on the cells. When you solder a bus bar, you're taking something that's 600 degrees Celsius and pressing on the cell hundreds of times, whereas we are melting a TCO layer onto the cell. The headline is you get more production because of this architecture for a couple of reasons. Most importantly, lower degradation and better temperature performance, which we'll get into in just a moment. This is looking at the actual mechanical structure of the module. What you'll see here is we don't have bus bars with solder-free connections. And another important part about why we chose heterojunction is there's fewer process steps in manufacturing. So if you look at traditional N-type TOPCon which we have done and have decided to not pursue because of its stubbornly high costs. HJT has something like 7 steps, whereas N-Type TOPCon would have 12 to 13 steps, and IBC specifically would have even more than that. All of that allows us to have a more efficient manufacturing process. And again, the cell technology allows us to produce more kilowatt hours. Low temperature manufacturing, I touched on that. Again, reducing stresses on the overall cell. So what does that actually mean for somebody who uses our product? This is one example we'll get into in more detail in a moment. There's 2 key benefits to a heterojunction technology. Number 1 is that they degrade more slowly. And number 2 is that they produce better in higher temperatures. And this illustrates the second point. So in areas where you may be getting as high as 110 degrees outside with the ambient air temperature, on the roof, that's going to be as much as 158, 160 degrees. In those applications, an HJT REC group module is going to produce 4% more power compared to a standard PERC module. And as we know, the longest days are often the hottest days. So this dynamic is really one of the core pillars of why our panels produce more electricity, and ultimately why we create more savings for homeowners. All right, that's the technology side. Let's talk a little bit about the product roadmap. So we have 4 products on the screen here. I'll start left to right. Alpha Pure 2 is our 420 watt module. And this will be going end of life. What we have found over the past 6 years, as we've invested into heterojunction technology, is that the industry is often catching up. And the way that the industry often catches up is by creating a larger rectangle that has the same nameplate as our smaller rectangle. And oftentimes homeowners will elect to go with the larger rectangle, even though it's less efficient. As a result, the space gets crowded. And so we have, in each iteration of our product roadmap, often had to end of life a product ahead of the market catching up. That's exactly what we're doing here with Pure 2. Now, we're getting ahead of this communication quite a bit. We sent out the communication to distribution last week. We have about 80 megawatts of this product available, which should last us well into Q2. We expect that last deliveries will be made in Q1. Depending on how demand shapes up, it may last until April. We recently end-of-lifed NPEAK 3, which was our N-Type TOPCon product. Again, most of the market is moving to N-Type. We were end-of-lifing it because, again, we're constantly ahead of that development curve, and we saw more opportunity with heterojunction. My point is, we end-of-lifed NPEAK 3 in Q2 of this year, and it's just now working its way out of the channel in Q4. So we expect Pure 2 to be in distribution with GreenTech for the first half of next year and probably into Q3. But we wanted to get ahead of this given the long sales cycles in the residential segment. So what's going to replace it? We have Pure RX, which is available today. This is a 450, 460 watt module. It's actually getting quite a bit of traction in both the residential and the commercial space. And so I know a lot of our installers are looking at expanding their addressable market by moving into commercial. This is a great opportunity to do that. We have a lot of customers using 450, 460 on both residential and commercial applications. Beyond Pure RX, we will be moving to Alpha Pro M, which has all of the same inherent properties of heterojunction technology, just in a slightly larger form factor, which gets us to 620 watts. And then in the second half of next year, we'll be introducing a bifacial Pro L, which will be about 700 watts, primarily for the utility segment. But did want to at least bring that forward and let you guys know that that's coming down the pipeline. I see we have a couple of questions here. We'll hit those at the end. Actually, we're about to jump into reliability. So let me take a look at some of these questions. There's a question about NPEAK 3. NPEAK 3 was end of life in Q2 of this year. So yeah, that production has stopped, but there still is some product available in channel. A good option to backstop it would be Pure 2 in Q4, and then moving customers to Pure R in the first half of next year. With that, Chris, I'll throw it over to you.
Sounds good. I just want to take a quick second to acknowledge there's a couple of great questions that are more industry-wide than they are REC specific, such as Steve's about the constant roadmap progression in the industry, driving towards larger form factors, higher power classes, higher voltages, higher currents, makes it a bit difficult in terms of if modules need to be replaced within an array or adding on to an existing system in a way that aesthetically looks good. So we should certainly park that and talk about that later. It's very important. And also another question that was a bit above there from RJ about something in the 400 to 410 watt range. Again, these are great industry questions that are not just specific to REC. But before we go there, let's talk a bit about what is job number one at REC. As I mentioned before, it is maintaining that class-leading warranty claims rate. So a highly reliable product. Basically, when we look at a solar panel, we don't just see a rectangle that produces 450 watts under STC conditions. We see it as a long-term 25+ year promise to the customer that it's going to produce a certain amount of energy for them. So how do we get there? Brian, let's talk through these slides and unpack a little bit about what this means to REC. The attitude since day one, yes, do we want to have a class-leading warranty? Absolutely, that reflects the reliability of the product, the quality of the product. But ideally, you want to have a warranty you don't even have to rely on, that you don't have to question the product. What does REC do internally to make sure that we're delivering that? We're going to see that in the next two slides here. The first is something that's become more front and center in the industry, I'd say in the last 3 to 5 years, which is this notion of extended reliability testing. So the industry standard for what constitutes a acceptable quality module has been captured under a set of standards from the International Electrotechnical Commission, IEC, under 61215 for a number of years. And that's been a battery of tests that's intended to basically provide highly accelerated life cycle testing, because we cannot take a module and put it outside in real life for 25 years and then report back to you. That's not very useful. We need to do something that's a little bit quicker than that. So these chamber tests, as they're called, where we're exposing modules to a humidity freeze, we're exposing it to thermal cycling, to damp heat, to UV. All these sort of things are batteries of tests that have a certain level of qualification for IEC 61215. If there is a product out there that is not meeting those requirements, it will basically not even make it to market. It will not have that certification. So it becomes a relatively low bar. How do you know if the product you're getting is actually much better than that? The accepted standard now, and REC is one of the front runners decades ago of going well beyond these IEC standards. So the viability of these tests is great. So the protocol around what is thermal cycling, what is damp heat, that's fine. But instead of just going to say 1,000 hours of damp heat, let's go all the way up to 2,000 or 3,000 hours. Instead of just 200 hours of thermal cycling, let's go to 400, let's go to 600. Even beyond that, let's not just look at one particular type of exposure. Let's do a combined cycle test. So we are combining, in this particular case, this is REC's own protocol that goes back for a number of years. Again, this was job number one. This was very important to REC since the beginning. We're going to combine these aspects of exposures and stresses that a module sees in real life. We're going to simulate that in a lab, and we're going to go put that single module, the same module, through mechanical load, through damp heat, through thermal cycling, through humidity freeze. Then we're going to flash at the end to see how it performed, basically how much it degraded. This has been the internal metric of success at REC since the beginning, and something that the company still does far better than others. Brian, if we could advance the slide deck, that would be great. Of course, this, you would imagine with this internal focus, this is also corroborated by third-party resources. So for folks that are not necessarily on the scientific or the laboratory side of the industry, a full-blown, say, PQP report from PVEL may be a bit overwhelming. It's hard to understand what you're looking at. So what typically happens from these organizations is a reliability scorecard top performer mark. And what's very interesting here is not just in any particular year that REC has achieved this, but looking across the span of years to the left-hand side, this is a very difficult thing to do across new product transitions, where we're not just, say, growing a form factor, we're going to a fundamentally different platform. So if you look at the beginning of the cycle, circa 2016, we were producing multi-crystalline PERC half-cut cells that are relatively small. Fast forward all the way to today, we've already gone through N-type PERT, which is now what people call TOPCon, and landed on N-type mono heterojunction. We've gone from a relatively small wafer size to a larger G12 wafer size. Across all of those product transitions, REC has done the appropriate due diligence in our own internal testing and our own combined cycle testing that we are still considered top reliability performers, even with brand new products. This is something that we feel offers really unparalleled comfort and ease of mind to our customers. Brian, let's go ahead and look. I think there's just about 2 more slides in this particular deck. And actually, this is a great time to talk about the performance advantages of the design. So this is not necessarily the manufacturing or the reliability of the product, but why is this heterojunction alpha product better than others that you could get in the market?
Yep. Thanks, Chris. So yeah, we call this the REC Alpha Advantage. And let me see if I can advance here. We, again, look at it as our responsibility to move beyond just selling our solar modules to help installers learn how to sell solar, and also create a product that helps installers sell more effectively, and then also help salespeople close more and help homeowners save more. So there's really value that we're trying to add across every step of the end user experience. And so what we're going to go through here is how does that value show up? For homeowners, it's pretty straightforward. As I said earlier, our rectangles produce more kilowatt hours. That equals more homeowner savings. I'm going to give you an example of that. And ultimately, that is what matters most in terms of who benefits from all of the engineering and scrutiny that goes into the manufacturing process of our modules. Moving one step away from the homeowner, solar is still pretty new, right? It's still novel. With less than, I think, 2% adoption nationally. A lot of kind of myths and unknowns are out there around why going solar makes sense. And so enabling a salesperson to help them be more effective at the kitchen table is paramount in helping drive more solar adoption and ultimately put more REC panels on roofs. Our panel helps sales reps close more. We'll talk a little bit about that, but the headline is that by pitching a premium product, there is multiple surveys that demonstrate you are more effective and more likely to win or close the sale, and that homeowners are more likely to refer. And then finally, how can we drive more profitability to the installer that is GreenTech's customer, right? Our module can help in a number of different ways to do that, and we'll kind of go through some of those details here. So starting out with, again, the most, in my mind, important metric of value that is created from a solar module. How many kilowatt hours does that module produce over the lifespan, over the warranted lifespan? So what we have here is a model created in PV-Syst. PV-Syst is an engine that's very similar to PV Watts, but it takes into account a more complete complement of variables, including temperature, thermal performance degradation, et cetera, as well as the IV curves. So we used PV-Syst here, and what we did is we modeled a 12 kilowatt system in Arizona. And we looked at what would the performance of this system look like across, it looks like 7 different modules. These are all levelized and measured as kilowatt hour per kilowatt peak. So it doesn't make a difference if you're using a 410 module or a 460 module, because we're using a ratio here. Everything is standardized. And we did this in Arizona to illustrate, one of the more harsh environments and frankly, one of the larger solar markets. We can run these models and have run these models across the United States. If you would like more detail, reach out to your regional sales manager, which we can get you their roster here in a moment. The high level is with the REC Alpha Pure RX 460, we produced 335,000 kilowatt hours in 25 years. With the Pure 2 420, it's around 327,000 kilowatt hours. That can be abstract for a homeowner. I don't actually know how many kilowatt hours it takes to run a light bulb or how many kilowatt hours my dryer might use. But what's important to note here is the difference between REC and the rest of the competition. We've anonymized this to keep a level playing field, but you can kind of infer who these other competitors are based off of their country of origin. And what you'll see is, we're producing anywhere from 10 to 20,000 kilowatt hours more over the life of the system. If you use, an avoided cost of power over 25 years of, let's just call it 20 cents, you're looking at $2,000 to $4,000 more in savings for the homeowner. And again, these are against N-type TOPCon products that are kind of what the industry standard is becoming. So I see a question here about where does SunPower stand in this chart. We actually don't have SunPower in this chart. Given their recent bankruptcy, we left them out. That said, these are the top tier one competitors that are introducing TOPCon products. And again, the high level takeaway here is that when you go solar with REC heterojunction products, the homeowner will save thousands of dollars more on their electricity bill over the 25-year life of the system. That also means that they might be able to electrify their home further and not get as large a bill, and or you might not need to put as many modules on the roof. At the end of the day, there's value created however you slice it, and there is more savings for the homeowner. We'll come back to Paul's question here in just a minute. Chris, you can take a look at that. A second value prop here is helping at the point of sale, right? At the kitchen table. And this point is near and dear to my heart. Previous life, I was running sales effectiveness for Sunrun, and my team was responsible for the consumer experience, the sales pitch, the platforms that presented them, and the training of our sales teams. And what we found was invariably when you pitched a more premium product, a couple of things happened. You converted more effectively, so more customers went solar. And number two, those customers were more likely to refer. So that was our own anecdotal experience. That's been corroborated through a number of different studies. Here's one. This is a Harris Poll study that was conducted in 2020. And what it says here is 7 out of 10 homeowners are willing to pay a premium. We went further and did an analysis of how much of a premium would homeowners be willing to pay. And what we found is that generally speaking, branded proposals could sell for as much as a 10-cent per watt premium over generic proposals. And so that's what we'll talk about in the next section, is how to become a certified RCSP with REC Group so that you can use branded proposals. The last point here is that customers are more apt to go solar if there's day one savings. And if you're using a more efficient module that produces more kilowatt hours, you're more likely to have day one savings. So when you stack all this together, you've got a premium solution that offers more savings over the lifetime of the system, that creates more value, that helps a salesperson close more effectively at the kitchen table. And then most importantly, it helps them get more referrals, right? Leads are the lifeblood of a residential business. Customers who go with a premium product often want to tell their friends about it, right? And so that's an entire segment that we have training on, which we're not going into detail today, but we can certainly offer for your customers. We have follow-along trainings on how to run an effective sales process, how to get more referrals at the point of sale, how to pitch a premium product and close more effectively. If you're interested in learning more about that, reach out to us afterwards. We'd be happy to set up a lunch and learn and talk you guys through that. I'll go to the next slide and then we can maybe address some of these questions, Chris. The last point here is how do we create more profitability for installers? And this is a bit of an eyesore. We will send it along as a follow-up. But I think it's important. GreenTech does a fantastic job of being not just a supply chain provider, but a business consultant for your customers, and helping your customers who are oftentimes new at solar understand how to run a more profitable, more durable business. And that's what this slide is really intended to illustrate. So to walk us through this, we've got a model here that shows 2 proposals. The first is with a 460 watt module, 20 of them, that's 9.2 kW. The second is with a 425 watt module, 20 of them at 8.5 kW. And the way to walk you through the math, we start with a system cost of $3 a watt. We make some assumptions around labor costs, and we make some assumptions around indirect costs, which is, the fixed costs associated with doing a business. All of these are levelized across both proposals, which I'll walk you through. As we look at the proposal cost stack, proposal 1 is REC Group. We're assuming that our module costs 50 cents here. And what you'll note is that that is 10 cents higher than the competitor. So we're acknowledging, and if you look at the previous slide, consumers will often pay as much as 10 cents more for a premium product. So we've modeled that in here. The cost of our modules is $4,600 versus $3,400 for the competitors. Inverters cost a little bit more. You do have to use a higher voltage module inverter with our Pure RX. So we've included that here at about 2 cents. And then racking, installation, balance of system permitting and engineering follows through. All of them are driven by the system size. And so you can see that the direct install costs are a little bit higher on this system, right? $13,800 versus just shy of $12,000. When we look at the indirect costs, those should be the same across both, right? Because you have the same fixed costs that are spread out across the total system size. When we come down to the total costs, you'll see again, the REC Group module did cost more. And I think this is where people get hung up, is that it just costs more. But we don't take the next step to think, did it create more value? And that's what this bottom deck shows. If we're charging $3 a watt at 9.2 kW, this installer would be able to charge $27,600 compared to $25,500 for a smaller system. Again, we have a more efficient module. You can get more kW on the roof. That drives more revenue for the installer. As a result, when you deduct the costs from the revenue, you earn $1,700 in profit on this project compared to $1,500 in profit on the second project. This is the unlock for installers that REC Group's here to help installers understand, and I think GreenTech is uniquely positioned to articulate. It goes beyond just focusing on price. It's where do you create value? By selling a more premium product, you help homeowners save more, you help your salespeople close more effectively, and you create more margin for your installer, all while charging a bit higher cost, which can put more money into GreenTech's pockets. So we'll send this around. This is a model that we've created. There's nothing proprietary about it. We're happy to share it, and I imagine you guys have something similar. We just wanted to spend some time on how we can create value across each of those 3 pillars. With that said, I'll pause. Chris, maybe we can answer some of the questions that we have here.
Yeah, I was looking through. There's some really, really good questions. What I would recommend, Brian, if you're okay with it, so we've got a sustainability and trade policy section that's really just 2 slides. And then we've got reference cases that's really just 2 core slides for the US market. I would like to briefly touch on those and then go to these questions. That way we can sort of spend the rest of the allotted time and make sure that we cover the core subject material for the folks that have to punch out early.
Sounds great.
Corporate social responsibility for REC has really been a fantastic area of focus for the industry in the last few years. This is something that really hadn't had much exposure, I think, to the mainstream media and to the consumer base, especially with respect to understanding the length of the value chain within solar. That yes, we've got solar modules, and most folks know that there are solar cells that go into that, but going above that to wafers, to ingots, to the refining process for solar grade polysilicon, and wait, you're actually refining the quartzite in a different step up here, which is called metallurgical grade silicon. Where is that done? And in essence, by buying these products, what sort of labor practices, what sort of environmental practices are we promoting, are we supporting? And especially with UFLPA, the Forced Labor Prevention Act, there was really a kimono open to the industry that said, hey, this is how some folks are doing this. Is this the right way or not? For REC, since our genesis was in Northern Europe and Norway, part of the Northern European mentality has really been on environmentalism around sustainability since day one, to the point of locating our earlier plants right alongside hydroelectric facilities. So this is something that we haven't lost sight of when we went and located our manufacturing operation in Singapore. That again is an area that is very different than the rest of Southeast Asia. There's very tight and stringent controls around both labor utilization as well as environmental aspects and pollution. So this is something that's been favorable to REC in the sense that we didn't have to do anything differently. We just had to create some materials to show the world, show our customers what we were doing. We won't go step by step through this particular resource. This is a CSR manual that's available on our website. It has a release every single year. If you have any trouble on recgroup.com finding that, please just submit us a brief web inquiry and we'll send it over to you. But again, this is something that's really, I think, represented sort of a coming back to center of, yes, we should all be aware of these things. How is it done and how do we want to be doing this? And I'm proud to say that REC has always been on the right side of this and we continue to be a front runner there. On the next slide is something that's a little bit more timely and uniquely to the US policy related, which is this latest round of anti-dumping and countervailing duties tariffs that's in process. These investigations, we've had one form or another that's going on in this country since 2012. They take quite a bit of time. So the first step is, does this petition even get picked up by the DOC and ITC, the Department of Commerce and International Trade Commission? Then they go through a process of finding a preliminary determination, then it gets translated into a final ruling. We're basically at the nose end of this, where the preliminary determination for countervailing duties came out. That is always by far the smaller amount of the two, the anti-dumping component, especially for a non-market economy like China or like Vietnam, always quite a bit higher. That will come out. We're actually hearing instead of mid-November, it's likely delayed to the end of November or maybe beginning of December, but that's still fairly close. And this is going to completely shake up the supplier dynamics in the US in terms of what is a economic product. And by that, I mean, when a particular importer, when a manufacturer who is importing a product into the US is subject to duties, this is a liability from the importer of record, which is generally the manufacturer, to the US Customs and Border Protection Agency. That represents an increase in net effective cost structure. So there's materials, there's labor, there's transportation costs, and if you have to pay a tariff, it simply goes on top of that. This investigation, this latest round of anti-dumping countervailing duties, is targeted at 4 Southeast Asian countries that you see named here: Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia, which is majority where the Chinese affiliated companies have set up operations, and there will be different numbers for different exercises for each one of these. But ultimately, in whole, this targets the sum total of about 80% of crystalline silicon imports to the US within the last 3 to 4 years. So this is a major route to market for how folks were accessing solar modules within this country, and the whole deck is going to get reshuffled going forward. The chart on the left is simply an assessment today of what sort of manufacturing capacity is outside the scope. So of course, with REC production currently in Singapore, then subsequently in India, we are completely outside the scope of this investigation. So we know that our tariff rates for this are 0. We are not a part of this investigation, but others may have quite high duty rates that range anywhere 10, 20, 50, could be 200+%. So what else is outside the scope? Well, the easy one would be a technology that's not even in the crosshairs, which would be CadTel thin film from First Solar. That's a utility product. That means nothing for residential and for C&I. If we look at Southeast Asian countries outside of the scope of this investigation, if we look at current India providers, the scoping of this is crystalline silicon cells, whether or not made into modules. So if it's an Indian module manufacturer using Southeast Asian cells, guess what? They are under the scope of this. If it is a US module manufacturer bringing in cells from Southeast Asia, there's going to be a tariff applied to the cell value. So it is very, very widely encompassing what the potential impacts of this can be. And the big takeaway here is that the safest bet is a provider that is reputable, of high quality, high performance, that is completely outside the scope. Who do we know to be in that category today? REC, not many others. I think that's a nice wrap up to that particular section. Brian, if we could just look at the first 2 reference case slides. I'd like to make a point here just because the industry has grown so rapidly and changes so much year to year that sometimes things that happened just a few years ago seem like the ancient past. So we have been focusing on our residential business since the advent of the Alpha product lineup. So our heterojunction starting in 2019, and we've deliberately taken a step back from participating in the large project space for the utility segment and also in C&I but the company knows how to do this. Of course, the intrinsic attributes of performance reliability, that is a great fit for these larger projects. It makes debt providers and tax equity providers extremely happy. So I'd say the poster child for this, we did a 3-project portfolio with Recurrent Energy before the acquisition by Canadian Solar. Largest there, this would be 257 megawatts, which was in Fresno County in California. And then fast forwarding to the next slide would be an example of some what I call non-residential distributed generation or CNI type of applications, which is Costco rooftops. We've got some big names that are recognized, UPS, IKEA, as well as government organizations such as the Veterans Administration. So this Pro-M, and for the folks that are considering the Pure RX 450, 460 to be sort of a dual purpose product, which I completely agree, it's on the larger side for a resi format, and it fits well in a lot of commercial applications. This is not something that is new to the company. It's something that we have a great story of bankability and success. With that, let's put a pin in this deck and address some of the questions. Brian, how would you like to go about this? Would you like to go through and pick through some areas that are best suited for your subject matter expertise and then flip the rest over to me? I do have a hard stop in about 9 minutes here. I think you're on mute there, Brian.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I also have a hard stop. So let me pick through these and see if I can answer some of these specific to the product. And then we'll see if we can throw a couple over to you. Team, if you guys have additional questions, now is a great time to throw them in there. And we'll go ahead and respond to them as efficiently as possible. So there's kind of a thread here around panel size growing. If they grow too large for residential installs, there's also, the dynamic of handling from a supply chain standpoint. We fully recognize and are aware of that. I think there's an additional comment here from Andrew about a one-man lift with regard to OSHA requirements. So I'll hit that quickly. We appreciate that ever increasing form factors are difficult to manage around. And in many ways, the industry has kind of forced our hand in that regard. From a supply chain standpoint, certainly using a smaller module that's more efficient, it would make more sense. I've had a lot of customers tell me, why don't you make the 325s anymore? And the simple answer is that customers would pay less for a 325 than they would for a 420 or a 460. If we could find out that customers would pay more for a smaller module that was more efficient, more applicable for residential application, then we would absolutely do it. This is a market dynamic as to why we choose the form factors that we do. And again, REC Group often is pushing the envelope on the higher nameplate because we have a more efficient module. Our competitors catch up by creating larger modules to match that nameplate. They have less efficient technology, and therefore they have to make a larger module to match the nameplate. Now, the most important point of this is what Andrew commented on about the OSHA weight limit. There is a OSHA guideline. I'll be clear, it's not a requirement. It is an OSHA guideline that modules should not be over 50 pounds and use a one-man lift. An installer can do whatever they like with regard to their installation practices. Again, it's just an OSHA guideline. It's not a requirement. If they choose to use larger than a 50-pound module with a one-man lift, they likely have to carry more insurance. They have more liability. They have to do an ergonomic study. There's a lot more work that goes into it. So in general, the industry uses 50 pounds as a standard, but I would call it out that it's just a guideline. It's not a requirement. Most importantly, the REC Pure RX is 50 pounds. It falls below that 50-pound threshold. I think it's 49.7 pounds. And so it can still be used as a one-man lift. The reason I think that's important is if manufacturers continue to play catch up and try and introduce a 450, 460, 470 watt module, it will be above 50 pounds. There's no way that you're going to be able to do it in under 50 pounds without using something like a heterojunction technology. So we're very focused on that. The Pure RX is under that threshold. It's probably more detailed than you needed, but I figured that would be worth it. Let's see here. There was a question about a few customers with year-old Alpha Pure panels that want to add panels. What panel can you use? I would say today you could use Pure 2 There is also NPEAK 3 that is still available in the channel. And or, I would say Pure RX would be the third option there. Let's see here. There was a question about SunPower, which we already addressed. Some questions about wind loading. What I will say is, as module form factors increase, having a high wind load zone qualified product does become more difficult. And so in areas like the Bahamas and southern Florida, which was just hit by a hurricane, you're going to have to use 3-rail systems. And in some cases, those wind load requirements are becoming onerous and limiting the total application. Pure 2 does qualify on a 2-rail system. Pure 3, you should need to use a 3-rail system on that one. I see a question about failure rates. I think we actually, and I think this is my fault, left that slide out. But Chris, maybe you can speak to failure rates. It says, what is the failure rate of the panels? 1 out of every 15,000? David asked this.
Yeah, great question. So that's sort of a numerical translation, because when it's very low, it's more convenient to talk about this in terms of parts per million. What we referenced before is that the corporate target has been set for a very long time below 100 parts per million. What are we really running between 50 and 80? If you take an average, even on the high side, say 75, what is that equivalent to in terms of number of failures per number of modules? It's about 1 in every 13,000 or less.
Right. So to put another number on that, the way I often think about that is you would have to purchase between 4 and 5 megawatts of REC grid products before you had a failure, which is orders of magnitude different than the industry standard. Industry standard is thousands of parts per million. We're tens of parts per million. What factors does REC use to grant the REC Pro Trust? Pretty straightforward. Generally speaking, we look for companies that have been in business more than 2 years and that have good standing with the Better Business Bureau and with review sites. And then from there, in order to become qualified, you have to go through 3 trainings. One is a marketing training, one is an install training, and one is a sales training. Once you've done that, we take a look at the overall market to make sure there's not too much density. And then you have access to our Pro Trust warranty, which is a 25 times 3 warranty. Again, reach out to your regional sales manager, and we can certainly help you become an RCSP, which is our REC certified solar professional. Working through this, I see some questions around pricing and noting that pricing is higher, and that again accords with the premium product and the premium brand. That said, we do have a pricing strategy that is specific to each individual installer. And so if this is a product that you think makes sense for you and could help you grow your business, we encourage you to reach out to us, and we can negotiate and work out specific pricing attached to specific volumes that can make it easier to access our product as your business grows, and you can purchase more of our product. You can often get a lower price.
Brian, if I could piggyback on that, because that's an excellent question, which is the Alpha Series has been positioned since day one as a premium offering, which indeed is correct, but there's a market segment that's a little more price sensitive. So what are we doing here? In the longer term, the answer is that we're transitioning all of our best-in-class manufacturing practices to India, where we'll have a fundamentally lower cost structure, and we'll be able to offer these same advantages at a lower price and still maintain healthy corporate margins so we can be a healthy ongoing entity. In the meantime, in this transition phase, Brian, as you said, there's the ability to work through GreenTech and your local REC regional sales manager to come up with a special pricing arrangement. So some GreenTech regions and PCs have more of these on file than others, but it is available in every single region. And this is just a dialogue that needs to be opened up. And I think you will find that going into 2025, because we recognize what's happening in the marketplace, that there will be additional flexibility from REC in coming up with a solution that works for your regional market.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, absolutely. Well said. The last couple of questions here are more product specific. Do we have a resource around inverters and optimizers that pair with our product? We do. Reach out to your GreenTech representative. They also have it, but I'll make sure that is broadcast as a follow-up to this. In general, if you're using the Pure RX, which is our 460, you'll need to use the IQ8X or the SolarEdge. I believe that they just introduced an S620, I think is the optimizer. And for the Pro M, that is, again, more of a commercial product, which pairs predominantly with string inverters, although you can also look at the Enphase commercial application. There's another question about Pro M using 3 rails in high wind load zones. That's the specific caveat, is that you would need to use 3 rails, but that's only high wind load zones, primarily in Florida, the Bahamas, or other areas that have hurricanes. And again, throughout the rest of the country, you should be able to use a more standard application with either ballasted racking solutions or standard racking solutions. And the last question is, how do you get more information on the sales trainings we mentioned? Best place to start is with your GreenTech representative and or a REC Group regional sales manager. They can walk you through the process, and we'll make sure that you guys have access to all of those resources as a follow along here. We really appreciate the time. And it looks like we're bumping up against the clock. I had one last question here. I'll have to come back to this because we're bumping up against the clock. Seller's asking for it.
And I'll apologize. Well, I need to hop to another meeting, but there's a lot of great questions in here. I think the way to interact with REC, make sure you get in touch with your local PC. Every PC has a REC regional sales manager to contact. So there will be a direct line of communication into REC. All these questions are very important, very relevant, and some of these could be an hour discussion amongst themselves. We really, really appreciate the interest, and I think you'll be really excited to see what's coming from REC in the next several years. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris. Likewise, I appreciate everybody's time, and do reach out to us directly if you guys have additional questions. Thanks so much. Have a great day, guys.